My name is Shawn Oliver, and this is my presentation on Robert Mills Gagne. Gagne was an American educational psychologist born in 1916 in North Andover, Massachusetts. In 1937, he earned his bachelor's degree from Yale University, and in 1940, he graduated from Brown with his PhD. After completion of his degree at Brown, he went on to work for Connecticut College for Women, Pennsylvania State, Princeton, University of California, Berkeley, and his final professor position was with Florida State University until his death in 2002. After working at College Connecticut for Women before starting with Penn State, he was drafted into the United States military during World War II. While in the military, he became a lead research director for the United States. He worked with Air Force pilots, developing their training program, and created an aptitude test to help choose and sort aviation cadets. Robert Gagne was a constructivist. He viewed learning as a cumulative action, that intellectual development is a building process. In a 1974 article, Gagne said that us learning is simply a set of planned external events which influence the process of learning and thus promotes learning. He viewed learning as a mechanism. He said that it is how we become functioning members of society. Learning results in our different human behaviors, require stimulations from our environment. Gagne authored many publications throughout his career, but his Conditions of Learning was one of the most often referenced and most often used titles in education. In Conditions of Learning, you see a living document that evolved over time as his career evolved. It's really where he started to hone in on his different levels of learning. Gagne's 1968 title, Contributions of Learning to Human Development, he really wanted to strengthen the position of G. Stanley Hall and Piaget. He wanted to focus on a cumulative learning model where kids progressed based on their capabilities that were built upon each other. Gagne believed the complex principles are just combinations of simpler principles, and then he takes those big, complex ideas, and by breaking them down into their pieces, he can help that used to prior learning. And then when you acquire it based on previous chains, and those connections allow you to combine our concepts. In his domain of learning, he helped distinguish parts of content that are subject to different instructional treatments. He related the instructional procedures of one subject to another. Instead of just focusing on math being math and science being science, now we're able to work across departments. And of course, it required different techniques of assessments and learning outcomes. So we're not just sitting on one way to assess a child. Gagne had 5 domains of learning. The first was motor skills, an individual's ability to mediate and organize motor performance, much like tying your shoes. Verbal information was facts, principles, and generalizations made up a large portion of any curriculum. Intellectual skills were discriminations, concepts, and rules that contribute to the basic skills of elementary curriculum. Cognitive strategies and attitudes were not learned by practice, but through vicarious reinforcement. In Gagne's Mastery in Learning Instructional Design, he was really inspired by Benjamin Bloom. How Benjamin talked about mastery learning, taking what kids know and being able to figure out what it means to actually learn that information. He was frustrated with the thought of 70% as a passing notion. Because when you say 70% is a passing grade, that means you're acknowledging that 30% of what was presented to you, you didn't know. This is really where he fortified his 9 events of instructions. While they did make prior appearances in his art, this was the article he really hammered them home. These 9 levels of instruction is how a lot of teachers build and create their own curriculum that still impacts us today. As I mentioned earlier, some of Gagne's influences and theories are still felt today. Instructional design models are still present. We see condition-based modeling where learning is classified into categories and instructional supports are built within those categories. Gagne's theories have spawned at least 2 generations of instructional design theories. And even in its curriculum design, though he was not a curriculum design person, W.B. Reagan made use of Gagne's ideas when he wrote his modern elementary curriculum. Of course, no good instructor doesn't come without his critics, and Gagne, of course, had his own. Critics that studied design realized that it required the participation of students in order to be effective, which, of course, by their motivation, can single-handedly determine whether or not someone who was successfully synonyms versus content learning synonym versus content-centered instruction started to trend more towards student self-guided learning process. For Gagne, instructors were integral, a huge piece, but that role is diminishing when you see project-based learning gaining traction, where our instructors are more guided helpers. And then, of course, his final thing, one of his major things he's known for, 9 levels of instruction, needs a lot of guidance. And then once you get to that critical thinking step, we have to make sure our learner doesn't chase the wrong lead. And then once we figure that out, we always have to make sure they're on the same track where they're supposed to be going. And you can then end up with a learner who follows directions well, but may not necessarily be good enough to replicate them on their own without being asked. In conclusion, Gagne impacted the learning community greatly during his lifetime and post mortem with his creation of the 9 levels of learning and other items. Those items are still used in the classroom and curriculums across the world. He has continued to inspire educators who can successfully meld his learning theory with today's students. By being able to do that, we can lessen the stress that's building on the foundation of our students. The scaffolding design of Gagne's learning theories are present all over, especially within the confines of mathematics. Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. Remember, be great where your feet are. And Jesus died for you, and that changes everything.